In all of this, of course, one of the other impacts that happens as well is that when you have economic, political, social instability, it's the people in control that face the brunt of that. So the politically, we talked about, but sometimes people attack the church, blame the church, try to take church lands from bishops, etc. In some cases, priests fled from the instability and disease. Right? So when the disease comes in, they leave. Other priests, however, stood up to serve and attempted to relieve the suffering of the people of the particular parishes that they were in charge of. Let's look at some things related to developments in the eastern part of Europe, the Orthodox side. From the early 1200s, with the Fourth Crusade, and even prior to that, the Byzantine Empire was beginning to break apart. The Crusaders had conquered Constantinople in 1206, the Fourth Crusade, and had forced the people to adopt the Latin or Catholic form of liturgy, other rituals related to that. Eventually, though, the Byzantine forces did reconquer the city and reestablished the Byzantine Empire and a lot of the things that we talked about the last time. However, on the eastern borders, the Turks are gradually taking control of a variety of cities. They're cutting the east as well from the west, particularly Constantinople. And so they're moving into those areas controlled by the Byzantines. The Black Death, of course, is also causing instability as well. There are blockades around Constantinople to prevent people from spreading the Black Death. And between the years 1346 and 1349, almost half of the city died because of the Black Death. With the spread of Islam and with Muslims taking over Byzantine lands, there are several attempts made between the Emperor and the Patriarch of Constantinople to try and reunify with the West to gain Western support against the Muslims. In 1438, for example, a reunion council between the Byzantine Emperor, the Patriarch of Constantinople, and the Pope resulted in the Orthodox representatives accepting the papal primacy and the use of Filioque in the Nicene Creed. Now, when this gets back to the other Byzantine citizens, they reject it. Others wanted to reject the whole thing. The patriarchs of Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria break their fellowship with Constantinople because they feel that they have succumbed to pressure. By 1450, the empire is very much reduced from its previous size. In 1451, the leader of the Turks, Mehmed II, is surrounding the city, preparing to take it over. He was born in 1432, but becomes the sole heir of the Ottoman Empire at the age of 11. As was common during the time, he is sent to govern part of the region, a region in modern-day Turkey. And 1 year later, he becomes Sultan at the age of 12. The Sultan was essentially the emperor. He becomes emperor when his father abdicates. His father gives up the throne. But essentially, he does not like this. So he keeps trying to convince his father to take the throne again. In fact, writing to him at one point, if you are Sultan, come and lead your armies. If I am the Sultan, I order you to come and lead my armies. And so the idea is, I want you back here as Sultan, which he eventually will do, and then will die several years later, and Mehmed will become the Sultan again in the year 1451.
So they were playing hot potato with the throne?
Pretty much. And so there's a lot of political intrigue as to how he ends up back in power. But essentially, the younger son, I guess, felt that it was too much, and so
the exact opposite of all the problems that England and France was having.
yeah, everybody wants it. On the other side, nobody wants it. But finally, he will become Sultan at the age of 19, just a few years later. And as he is surrounding the empire, surrounding the city of Constantinople, the Byzantine emperor appeals to the West. The emperor is Constantine XI. There were other people that were named something other than Leo and Constantine between all of that stuff we talked about with the iconoclastic controversy. He's born in 1404, is the fourth of 6 sons of the previous emperor, but several of his brothers die, and he's kind of maneuvered into becoming the heir. In order for there to be help from the West for the Pope, there must be reunification. And so he is adamant with Constantine that there must be a reunification, but it's not just a reunification where there will be this mutual respect like there had been in previous centuries. Instead, the Orthodox Church must recognize the supremacy of the Pope. Right? So the Pope's interested in controlling the East, not, right, let's all just get along. Right? I'm okay, you're okay, and that's all right. Well, Constantine is willing to do that, willing to give that up. And so the Latin rites are held in the Hagia Sophia, the place where the papal bull of excommunication for Patriarch Michel Cyrillarius had been given. However, although they agree to this, it ends up the Pope doesn't really have the power he either thinks he does or the East thinks he does. A lot of the Western nations that are developing during this time have a lot of suspicion of the papacy, suspicion of what they are trying to do, what it's trying to do in trying to gain control or gain power. Additionally, due to the 100 Years' War, there's a lot of decline in some of these nations as to the size of armies they're able to field because of the number of peoples that have died from the war, from the Black Plague. And so the West doesn't provide anywhere near the support that the East had been hoping for. Now, Arabs had tried to capture Constantinople in the 70s, but were not able to. There had been other groups that had laid siege to Constantinople and were held off. But in April 1453, Muslims laid siege to Constantinople, and within the month, at the end of May 1453, the city falls. Some of the troops with the Ottoman Empire are actually Christians. They had been in these lands that had been Byzantine but had fallen to Islam, and they had kind of been conscripted into the army. The Hagia Sophia will go from being the Church of Holy Wisdom to becoming a mosque. But the Byzantines, by and large, are still allowed to be Orthodox Christians in Constantinople. However, Mehmed and then later sultans will be the ones who determine who will be the patriarch. And so the patriarchate becomes a political office where if the sultan likes a person, he'll install them. If he doesn't like what they're doing, he'll take them out. All right? So it becomes a very politicized office, almost like what we had seen in the West with the papacy at certain times. What questions do you have? Anything we need to clarify? Let's move on then into talking about some things that are still kind of political to some extent, but also related to the spread of Christianity. And now we're getting towards more the end of this period and into the 16th century. Particularly, we're talking here at a time period where these nation states, as they are developing, are starting to want to develop empires. And part of that is not so much going to occur in taking over places in Europe, but finding other lands to take over. Very important individual in all of this, though certainly not the only explorer at this time, is Christopher Columbus. We mention him not because of his prominence, having a holiday named after him, but because of how much Christianity was wrapped up within what he was doing. He was very deeply religious as a Catholic. And part of his goal is to not only achieve wealth, but kind of sees it as he's getting ready to go on a last crusade. So he thinks of his activity in those terms. Very much time that there's a lot of instability in the Middle East, but he desires to extend his mission to the Far East. He's enamored with Catholic mysticism, especially St. John of the Cross and other mystics, the visions that they have had. One example of this is in a writing that he develops, a journal that he keeps known as the Book of Prophecies. Essentially focused on a variety of apocalyptic prophecies about the end of time, including Joachim Fiore. He sees his voyage as ushering in a millennial age. Now, he believes in a prophecy that had some currency at the time that spoke of a Spanish emperor ruling Jerusalem. So he sees himself as kind of fulfilling this religious mission. He sees the world, and sees the new world through a religious prism. It's not just about going and conquering other lands, discovering new lands. This is a religious mission. He lands, in the area where he lands, he refers to as San Salvador, which translates to our Savior. And so it's a very religious mission. Now, of course, yes, it's all mixed with wealth, and there is, on the other end as well, the atrocities, the violence that he extended towards Native Americans. Native Americans, in Columbus's mind, were not seen as equals. And so he kind of has two goals with relationships with Native Americans. How can we Christianize them? And how can we convert them? But also, how can we economically exploit them? And so there's, again, this is one of the complexities of history. While we might say, hey, it's great that you're sharing the gospel, on the other hand, he's also trying to get a lot of wealth. He tried to export Native Americans to Europe as slaves, penned them up in the ships. Many of them died during the journey to Europe. He used Native Americans as slave labor to load ships with the gold that he was taking back to Europe, demanding even that they load a certain amount of gold. And if those quotas were not filled, their hands would be cut off. Which seems to be counterintuitive. If they're supposed to be loading gold, how can you load gold if your hand's cut off? But the idea is you cut off enough hands, other people will feel, okay, let's work harder. Again, it doesn't always make sense how some people act. But representative of what becomes known as the Black Legend. Essentially this idea of Spanish brutality. This will especially become important more in the Reformation than this particular period. Now for this period, it's important for us to note that there were atrocities committed by the Spanish, but it also becomes kind of a prejudicial way to think about Protestantism, or for Protestants to look down on Catholics once the Reformation starts. Using propaganda with this historical content, trying to present the Spanish as inordinately violent and bloody. But there were brutal forms of violence, people slaughtered. And for the Protestants, Catholics were indicted in these atrocities. They were responsible for or participated in these things. Now, we could spend some more time talking about the atrocities, but I want to look as well at some other things related to the interweaving of Christianity with the beginning of the age of exploration. Often when the Spanish went to the Americas, they brought along missionaries to evangelize the indigenous peoples. Many of them, with the Spanish, tended to be Franciscans. Some were Jesuits, some were Dominicans, but quite a few were Franciscans. And so the mission wasn't just about conquest, it was also about this religious mission of conversion. And so the explorers, the conquistadors, and the Franciscans worked side by side. Remember, these are people who have modeled their spirituality on Francis of Assisi. People that have taken the vows of the order of Friars Minor. And so there is an intertwining here of conquest from the physical standpoint, as well as, when they're talking about evangelizing, they also see it as a conquest of these people. The primary strategy of the Franciscans is the mission system, setting up essentially kind of a Spanish town in the colonies. One of the first set up in 1530 by Ponce de Leon in the Florida Peninsula. Priests are brought after this to establish missions. The Native Americans would drive them off. Eventually, though, a mission was founded in St. Augustine, Florida. Kind of became the Catholic center of missions in 1556. By 1620, there were 44 established missions in Florida and the southeastern, what will become the United States. Also, efforts in southwestern United States, in Mexico. There was some mixed success where it flourished until about the 1630s, when there were a variety of rebellions by Native Americans that would eventually overthrow the Franciscans. Recaptured in the late 1600s. As we get into the 18th century, by 1750, there were 22 missions in Arizona and New Mexico. Continuing moving up the California coast, 1769, San Diego. The missions at their height spanned 600 miles of coastline. So missions in Mexico, the Caribbean, South America, etc. All these places where Franciscans and others were going. With it, of course, they have this spiritual mindset set up by Francis, the abject poverty, the rejection of society's trappings, and also the emphasis of the spiritual over the physical. And so purification came through asceticism, disciplining the body. Furthermore, the Franciscans tended to be more focused on generational conflict, rejecting your physical father for your spiritual one as you became a part of the order. And often the Franciscans focused on the conversion of youths instead of converting adults.